Welcome to Exceptional Effort Business Sunday. I'm here with Julian White, Ingrid Colquitt, Pete Keogh, and myself, Damien Andrews. Today we are talking about when to lead and when to follow, surrounding yourself with people that are much smarter than you. Welcome, everybody. Great to have you on this beautiful Sunday morning.
Welcome and happy Mother's Day.
Happy Mother's Day, yes. Make sure you all get your Mother's Day wishes out. So when to lead, when to follow, surrounding yourself with people much smarter than you. I know from my experience, that was something that I struggled with when I was much younger, I think because my ego was a little bit out of control. And I always thought I knew everything and was willing to tell everyone how to do things. But then later in life, I've actually learned to sit back, and even people that might seem to have very little knowledge, that I've actually drawn out a lot of knowledge from them, especially people that have been they might be in a position that's not high ranked within the business, but they've been there for a long time. And those people tend to have a lot of knowledge in their specific area, which is very helpful and can be very useful for a business in moving forward when you draw that out. And that's partly been my experience.
It's a little bit like judging somebody on the outside without actually, unwrapping and understanding what they do and what their functions are and how they add to the system that they're working in.
And it has to do with the art of motivating others as well. I mean, this is all part of as you say, unwrapping that what's underneath, of drawing out what's underneath, so that you can get that knowledge. And there probably are key skills we've all experienced as to how to draw that out.
Yeah, empathy is a big one. Trying to put yourself in other people's shoes, like trying to work out where their desire is, how much information they do have, education, etc. Depending on, from a work perspective, relationships, mentors, all that sort of stuff. It's complex, and I believe it's like a big piece of a jigsaw puzzle. You got to try and understand and know where everyone fits, and where they also could be sort of located in different times as well, if that makes sense.
So we're kind of touching on a couple of things: the ability to sort of reach out, understand, listen, have an inquiring mind, and continue to uncover what your workforce is doing for you and delivering for you. But it also hints at the fact that there's lots of different types of leadership styles, and you evolve those as a manager and as a leader yourself over long periods of time, and can start on this sort of quite, I guess, I would say almost a narrow spectrum where you're not as emotionally intelligent as you need to be as a manager in your sort of early 20s, and your bravado and your character is trying to assert itself into a situation or a workforce, whereas later on you kind of acquire this maturity to be able to step back and assess things more constructively and objectively, and with less emotion.
How important would you say that emotion, as you mentioned there, I just noted down there, dealing with yourself and different styles of leadership, but that having that awareness of yourself, because I know when you're young, and certainly from my perspective, it was all about trying to prove yourself and prove how smart you are and how much that you know to everyone else. And I noticed, I remember watching a documentary on Elon Musk when he was back in the original Roadster days, and they were in the factory and they're having all these problems. And what he would, they would talk about how there was all these delays, and he sat back, or he was there with them as they're talking to him, and he just asked the question, how are we going to solve this? And I'm wondering, from my experience, I've noticed that stepping back and just asking key questions. I had that when I was working on the Melbourne Airport duty-free upgrade, and I was leading the team there, and we had some issues that had to be resolved. And being an airport too, it's like you've got certain time constraints. It's very, very stressful to get the work done. And there was some things that had gone wrong, and I just I stayed calm, and I said, just guys, I had some ideas, but I just stood back and I said, hey, how do we solve this? How do we get through this? And some of the people that were just labourers said, well, maybe let's do this. And they had some great ideas. And then that flowed to a conversation that led to some really great solutions. And we got everything done. And then we worked till 3 a.m. in the morning. But that was, we got everything done in that time frame. So.
What happens at an operational level is that that's where the complexity is. And so if you don't take the time to understand, where you can go around and where you can, where things have to segue really well together. And an airport's a classic environment. They went through similar situations at both Brisbane and Canberra Airport when they tried to do the SmartGate rollout, it's actually the pilot of the SmartGate rollout. And they had to stop and regroup so many times because they hadn't thought about traffic flows well enough, or they hadn't thought about time and distance to gate and what happens for the user at the as they enter the airport well and how they're directed through. And on the surface, there's standard process steps that a passenger would need to go through to ingress. And yet they hadn't thought about it within the context of that layout in a particular airport. The people on the ground in those situations who were there every day, whether they were handling luggage, whether they were in the biosecurity teams, they had the answers. They absolutely had the answers. And you had to be patient enough to step back and go, look, I might be a smart person in there to solve complex problems, but sometimes a step in a complex problem is actually quite simple. Ask someone else.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that there's 2 points there. And the classic one is if you're a manager or a leader, people will come to you and say, oh, what do I do? And it's a very easy solution for a leader or manager to say, go and do ABC, because you just know the answer. Well, you think you know the answer. And we all know, the saying, don't bring me problems, bring me solutions. And I think you've got to evaluate each one of those, and some are complex and some are important or impactful to a business. So you can't let everyone just wander around and come up with solutions, but you can say to people, what would you do? If you were the business owner, what would you do? And 9 times out of 10, they'll say, oh, I'll do this. Okay, well, that's a good idea. What about if we just modify that and you start a discussion? Because the people, as you said, they're on the cold face. They're experiencing certain things that a manager or leader may not experience. So sitting up in an ivory tower, dictating all the time or any time is not the way to really grow or drive a business. And you look at the great business leaders, whether it's Richard Branson or those other guys, they do involve their people to get the answers from them, and step back and don't let your ego get in the way of controlling situations.
It's an interesting point that you mentioned there, Julian, when people come to you with a problem. And I had that particularly when I was in a manager in an accounting firm, and I was inundated constantly with people coming and asking me to solve problems, and I would solve the problem, and hence they'd keep coming back to me. And then I worked out that instead of what I then mandated, I said, okay, you're not allowed to come to me with a problem unless you've got at least 2 solutions, and then have a recommendation of which one you think is best. And this is where and that from that perspective, a lot of the problems disappeared because the people actually then had the confidence in themselves to then solve the problem themselves. But what that I think distinguishes is when we're talking about when to lead and when to follow is to identify what the part of leading is. So, for example, leading is more about guiding the people to the objective that you want. It's not so much doing the technical parts, and that's how to distinguish when to lead and when to follow. Is, am I dealing with the high level strategy, the objective of what we're working to, the goal of the organization, or am I dealing with the technical part? And this is, from my experiences, knowing when I need to step in and go, hang on a minute, we're a little bit off track with where we're going as a direction. So that's when I need to come in and say, hey, as a leader, we're actually going in this direction, you're a little bit off path, come back to the direction that we're going here. Or if they come to me with a technical problem, going, well, this is a technical problem, you're recognizing that they're on the right path, then it's for them to actually then, or my role as a leader is to step back and follow and say, well, what is the technical solution here? What is your expertise as to how you're going to achieve the objective?
So we spoke a little bit, we've touched a bit about some of the characteristics there of leadership. And I wrote some down before our session. There is, we sort of touched on empowering others to think, to do. But there's also some more subtle ones. We need to see the knowledge in leaders to be able to trust that they have the expertise to help the process along. We need to see people take responsibility, and actually that's a key behavioural thing that happens whether you're a follower or a leader, but followers certainly want to see that in their leadership, is taking that responsibility. And we need to create an environment that kind of protects and is safe for people to speak up and share their knowledge and think, and to be kind of firm but fair. So when things go awry, to not kind of point the finger of blame, but to reshape the direction in a decisive manner. So they were some of the things that I wrote down before our session, which I think are the persistent characteristics.
Ingrid, I get what you mean about the looking for the leadership in others. There's some followers that I've worked with that I knew that there was a part of them that had some leadership qualities in, but they were just so blinded or, encased in their own world of, no, I'll never be able to do that. And that's almost like a repetition of words that they do say to themselves about, I'm just who I am and I'll never ever be that. But to crack that egg a little bit and give them that opportunity and see how things flow. And as you said, give them the confidence. It's amazing. Like I've got one of my students who's fantastic about what he does, but he just didn't have the confidence to speak in front of a class. But over a 5-year period, I just gave him little opportunities, and before you know it, he's running his own class. And sometimes I have to say, okay, that's great, that's really, really good, because of how much confidence he has got now. So I think you're right, finding that inner leadership in someone and showing them the way is really good.
There's almost a bit of mentoring in there too, because there's a lot of in empowering others, you need to highlight to them how capable they are in certain things, and also be able to trust and have an open discussion about what they're not strong in, and for them for them to want to listen to that. And so there is an element of mentoring, or being able to stop and mentor as you work.
Yeah, and you raised one of the other points you raised there was taking responsibility. So it's very easy to say, what would you do? And depending on the person, the care factor might be 10 out of 10 or 0 out of 10, and they give you lip service. So taking that responsibility of your decisions and giving people, here's the problem, here's the solution. And that brings up that whole responsibility and empowering. And the second thing was that we all make mistakes. And if you do encourage people to go forward and make decisions and drive their section of the business, if it does screw up, which ultimately it will somewhere, then it's not the time to come in with a baseball bat. As I often say to people, what's done is done. We can't undo that. and let's unpick what happened, and let's make sure we don't let that happen again. And 9 times out of 10, that person's going to feel this big anyway. So you don't need to, pour hot water on them. Sometimes there's some careless things that people do, and you can say, listen, that was careless. So there's each, it's all different.
That's an interesting point too, about making note of what the character traits and empowering others. One of the stories that I love from Steve Jobs' leadership style, and he pointed this out a lot. He said, my job is not for you to like me. My job is to make you the best that you can be. And some people don't like it. I know from my experience, there's times where I push people and push them in areas they've got really uncomfortable, and it's a fine balance of how far you can push someone to draw out that inner ability that they have, because I think people have wonderful abilities and they just don't realize it. And I've had that with people where I've pushed them, they've got quite angry about that, and I've managed it. I've deliberately managed it, and then after a week later, they've calmed down and they've actually gone, wow, I didn't realize I could do that. And it's really drawn that out, and that's part of that leadership again, is when to lead, when to follow, is recognizing, I think that you're the leader is partly choosing the direction you're going, and also getting the best out of the people, so that then they can then you can step back and go, well, let that knowledge out, and they can deal with those technical side of things to do with fulfilling that overall strategy.
In some of the tier 2 companies that I've had the great privilege to work in, I think transparency, inspiration, and the ability for the top of the company to be able to communicate effectively all the way through to what they're trying to achieve is also something that's been a tell for an organisation that values its people and contributions up and down the stack. So, for example, at EDS, we would have a weekly message come out from our CEO, and then a fortnightly one that would touch on particular delivery arms of the business, particular activities. And they would talk very openly, not just about the success of that particular case that was running, whether it be a software build or a client relationship that had just been won, or whatever, but to actually take everyone, to know that everyone who was delivering in these streams of business could see what was going on in another part of the business, in EMEA, or in whether it be here in APJ, in Australia, Asia Pacific, Japan, whether it have been in the UK. There were case studies of activities, whether it was a business drive, we marketed this, we pitched this, we won this piece of work, this is what we'll be delivering and this is how. But it went everywhere. So everyone felt very in touch with their global body, with the intentions of the organisation, and it was persistent. It never dropped. So these are some things that also imbue trust, and they can make a huge difference in an organisation, regardless of where a person sits in that organisation. And to not discern, to not make a judgment about who should read this message. Everyone gets the message, regardless of who you are, whether you're a senior exec, or whether you're a grad, or whether you're, someone that feels perhaps a bit insignificant in the scale of things. To all get the message is very, very powerful.
That word's come up a couple of times in this discussion, is trust. how important is trust from a leadership perspective of knowing when to lead and when to follow?
Trust.
Question.
I think trust is paramount. But first of all, you've got to trust yourself, and then with the growth and the mentoring and different situations, as you were saying before, Damien, that's technical. That's not my skill set. I outsource that, and that's where many years ago I come up with a diagram that I don't know if you could see this or not, but every person I dealt with, including myself, I put them in the middle. And at times it's just me in there, and I want to look at my intent of what is my outcome. I want to look at my ability, what are my strengths, what are my weaknesses, and how to create pre-attempt opportunities. And then look at the situation I've got in the middle and see which one I need to work on more. And if I can't change that, I outsource it. And I do that with all my students. I do that with all people I've worked with to try and make, to me, a triangle is the strongest shape. And those three words, if we can put those three words together, intent, ability, opportunity, what our objective is wanting will happen. That's my little Bible that I work with all the time.
I mean, that's so simple, Pete, but it's so powerful, those three things. And to particularly have intention in there, you've got to have the intention to trust, you've got to have the intention to collaborate, you've got to have the intention. All of it fits around that. It's such a powerful key. So that's a very powerful diagram in of itself, and I'd really encourage people to actually pick that apart a little bit as an exercise.
I put that together from the three things you need to make a fire: heat, fuel, combustion. But if you want the fire, you've got to put them all together, those three. But if you don't want the fire, you take one away. So again, with relationships and work, etc., if there's something that's going on in your work life, take one of those things away if it's you that's doing it, or from someone else to stop what's going on. So I live by those three.
Julian, you had something that you wanted to add there?
No, I was just saying that often the simplest things can be the most impactful, and when you start, start to break that down. When you use those things about fire, it's very true, and you can lean into either one of those three words as much as you can. But I like the point you make, that if there's one of those words isn't you, you can move away from it and get help as well. Which I think it's another point. If you talk about leaders, I think good leaders are constantly looking to improve themselves. They don't know everything, and they're constantly researching and looking like a sponge to just improve themselves. As I say, the day you think you're really good is the day you're going to fail. That's just my own little motto.
Yeah,
be humble, and be willing to learn. Even be accepting and to learn from people below you. I want to say below, the people you're leading, that you've got an open door, you've got an open mind. So I think we've already discussed here, when people do have ideas or concepts, that they can bring them forward, and know that they're going to get a listen, and they're going to be taken seriously. Otherwise, as a leader, if you don't encourage people to come forward with ideas, then they won't. And they'll be scared and intimidated. And it's those ideas that help leaders learn more. It's like a big circle that keeps spinning around.
That circle that you talk about, we were talking off air just before we started the meeting, and I was saying to Ingrid about the spiral staircase. A good leader must have principles, and that's the first step. And then the next step is patience, because sometimes you don't know everything. But the third step is persistence. Otherwise, you're going to remain in the same spot, because that persistence leads to the fourth step, which you think is perfection. But when you get to that step, you realise you're starting back at the principles again, and so it just continually grows that way. People might throw in their other P words that may add to that staircase.
Julian is spot on, and I actually had humble written down as well, because if at any time you become so resigned that you think that you know everything, rather than build a little bit of knowledge and a little bit more knowledge, and then realize that the more knowledge you have, the little you know. There's so much still to learn in life, and unfortunately, we've all come across leaders that have started very well. You know, they've perhaps been picked for certain of the characteristics that we've talked about today, and succeeded for a while, and then failed dismally. And if you go back and dissect those situations, then often it's because they've perhaps become arrogant, perhaps become a braggart again, perhaps become too strong. There's not been enough vulnerability in there, and therefore not enough vulnerability given to others to thrive. So it's a balancing act.
Definitely.
And if you stop learning, you will fail.
I've been doing karate for 37 years, and I still feel like a white belt because the more I do know, the more I know that I don't know. And I think that if, you know, I'm never ever going to take my belt off. If like my kids say to me, Dad, when are you going to retire? I said, when you put me in the ground, because there's so much more to know, and I'm actually worried that I'm going to run out of time to learn as much as I can. So that's where the intent comes from, I think.
That humbleness you're talking about before is so critical to drawing out that information, and that's a lesson I learned the hard way. I certainly, there was a period in my time where humble was not you know, I had that, I can't remember the singer's name, but the song, you know, it's hard to be humble when you're perfect in every way. And, you know,
Chad Morgan.
What's that?
Chad Morgan.
Chad Morgan, yeah. So I had that attitude that, you know, I knew everything and I could solve it all. And partly that was, you know, without sounding like hyperbole, I was actually very skilled at a lot of things. So I thought I was justified in that. But like you said, Pete, you're very right. The more you learn, you realise that there's more out there. And I had that this week with one of my clients was out there, and we're dealing a number of factors as a leader. One of the graduates there had been struggling and not performing very well. And it was a bridge that was being built and designed. And I put it to him, I said, look, what I want you to do is I want you to come up with something that makes it feel as the bridge was going near where the ocean is. So I said, I want you to come up with something that's going to make it stand out, that we can just do quickly and easily, that's going to make, you know, that we can etch in or get laser cut or something like that to this bridge. And anyway, that design part was a couple of months ago. And he's, you know, said he hadn't been performing that well in the time that I'd been working with this company, and he took that on board and went away, and he come up with this brilliant design of starfish and seashells that were laser cut into certain panels within this bridge, and it looked fantastic. And I gave him a lot of praise and put it around the office and passed that on to the client in front of him so that, you know, he got recognition from that. And what was interesting from that point, his attitude completely switched. I know people talking about millennials don't like to work and things like that. I'm not sure I agree with that. I think people are people, and it doesn't matter what age. You find the right inspiration, a person, subject to them. Some people are just, you're not going to be able to work with them, and I accept that. But there's a lot of people, you just got to find that right inspiration. This guy, from that point when we're doing the design phase of that bridge, which was said a couple of months ago, has now turned into a gun. He's just like, and he's a millennial, he's still a graduate, he just fires off stuff, does these right things. And I think as a leader, of when to lead and when to follow, it was like part of the following was getting him to find these ideas, but I was inspiring him to actually go forward and do that, which then changed his whole attitude towards the work. And he's just been exceptional ever since.
It's a good story.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. And it's similar sort of thing with that humbleness I found from my perspective of and that's where that connected to. We're putting together the bridge now, getting ready to assemble it. It's going to be installed later this month. But even then, that humbleness of one of the guy that's the lead in the factory floor. I mean, he's not an educated person. He didn't finish high school. He has worked in that trade. He's worked in this company since he was an apprentice. He's been there for 15 years. And he's, I went to him about and said, look, you tell me what you need. How are we going to do this? How are we going to install it? This was my original plan when it was started. But I want your input. You're the one leading this. I want you to tell me what you need. I'll support it. And that was, I think, is a big key to let people know that you'll support them in what they're doing. I said, I'll support what you need, but you need to tell me what it is that's going to work for you. And he's kind of stood up taller and started to work further through that process. So,
you mentioned another important word there, Damien, and that's support. That when you are a leader, that you are supporting your team, and call it, that they know that you've got their back, so to speak. That if they do come up with solutions and you do encourage them and empower them to go forward, that they've got your full support. That they're not going to be, chastised, punished, or if they make a wrong decision. A lot of people I see are concerned about making wrong decisions. And as I say to people, no matter, and depending obviously on the position, no matter what you do, the maximum damage you can do is X. So this business will survive whatever you do that's going to hurt the business unintentionally. Oh, okay. And for some people, if they do something that costs the business $1,000, to that particular person, that may seem like, the end of the world. If the business is turning over 20 million, that's a drop in the ocean. So it's a balance of people not being reckless and careless, but they also know that they do have your support, which just gives them that extra confidence to keep their brain churning and coming up with new ideas and solutions.
It's a difference between the words we and you, I think. You use those collective nouns more than the individual ones, how fast some groups can actually go.
Mm.
In business analysis, we have what's called SWOT, which is strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. And it touches project management, program management, lots of different capabilities. But I use that in a way when I talk to people to say, I'm empowering you to do X. Go and do X. But as you work, think about the SWOT constantly. So you're teaching them about risk. You're teaching them to be responsible for that risk. And again, it's an empowerment through capability. So it has some discipline applied, which I really like.
Yeah, that support element I've found, it can be this element. It's one thing to be able to do it when everything is fine, to support your team. Another one, this is one I learned again the hard way, or learnt this technique, and then I've been in the position where I've actually had to do that. I remember being when I was working in the accounting firm, I was in a meeting and with the senior partner and a couple of other people and with the other side, and I planning my stuff, I stood up and I was quite confident in putting things forward, and there were some things that I'd put forward which were wrong, and what the partner did there is he didn't correct me in front of everybody else, and it was like he dealt with it, he took it on board, and he dealt with it quite tactfully. He didn't correct me, didn't make it out that I was wrong, which I clearly was, and it was dealt with afterwards. After the meeting, he's pulled me aside and said, "Hey, this part here was not quite right. You needed to fix it, and we'll deal with that as a whole." And that was an interesting learning from my perspective. Is that I felt he had my back, even though I was wrong in front of everybody else. he protected me. And I have had that same experience where I've been the lead person in the meeting. One of my juniors has gone and said stuff which is completely wrong, and I've dealt with it. Rather than saying, no, you're wrong to the person, I've addressed it and segued into how we are dealing with it. And then I brought it up with the person privately outside of public view, so which I think made a big difference in creating that support that you have for the people.
It's not just support, it's actually not shaming somebody. It's actually not shaming somebody. Because if you do that, you are soul destroying them. And that's what a lot of people that I've had around me in very male-dominated environments have failed to grasp. And actually, I've seen a couple of people almost go to ground because they've been intimidated into feeling like they can't think anymore, that they're insufficient and they've failed, rather than being respected, taken on that journey of learning the difference between what they were saying versus what the pathway is, or as you said, Damien, you know, in an example where you're not shaming them in front of, or embarrassing them in front of a whole heap of colleagues. It's some of the worst behaviour I've ever seen, and it's heartbreaking. It's absolutely heartbreaking, because you're eating.
Well, it's
that person's core.
Yeah, it's a form of bullying, and leaders that do that are insecure, and have got their own problems, in my opinion. But there's no need for it.
I agree, Julian. And
right, we've actually run quite well over time on this particular show, which because there's a lot of topic there, and I'm sure there's a lot more we can continue on with. But it seems that the big standout of the leading and following is understanding where the position is and what's actually happening, certainly from a perspective of not dealing with strategy and making decisions to strategy. I mean, that certainly falls within the leader's role. And then to do with the technical part of how to deliver that, that's where as a leader you probably want to step back and allow your team and draw out from your team their knowledge as to how to move that forward. I think, I mean, from what I understand is that seems to be the key takeaway from today's show. Is there anything? We just have one last point from everybody, and then we'll wrap it up.
Okay. Just to add to that, I think it's probably worthwhile, Damien, exploring what the follower wants to see in a leader.
Yeah, because we've all been there, haven't we? We've always, we've started somewhere, and we've followed, and then obviously found ways to step and learn. And as we've said before, we've all fallen over. So yeah, I think that's a really good point.
Yeah, and just to finish up, leaders need to keep a very open mind and be willing to keep learning. That's my favourite thing that I try and do every day.
Yeah.
All right. Thank you very much, everybody. Ingrid, Pete, Julian.
All right.
I'm Damien Andrews, and this has been Exceptional Effort Business Sunday.